Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we're continuing my top 100 board games of all time, covering games number 90 through 81. So let's not waste any more time and get straight to the list with my number 90, which is Merchants of Amsterdam, designed by Reiner Knizia and published by Rio Grande Games. And this game is long out of print. It's a very obscure game that very few of you probably have heard. This game has been on my list on previous years, and last year it ranked as high as number 78. It has dropped a few spots, but not too much when you factor in that I did not play this game at all in the entire calendar year of 2021. I do have plans on playing this game soon with my nephews, and I'm very excited about that. Now, this game here, basically you have this board, and this game is a very ugly looking game. There's a reason why it did not succeed, and it's because the components and the graphic design are subpar, even for its time frame. This game was designed back in the year 2000. But we have this board here divided into 4 quadrants, representing the 4 corners of the earth. Here you have this center little caricature map of Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam, divided into 4 districts, and basically players are trying to establish their trade houses in the different parts of the world. They're trying to establish their warehouses in the different districts of Amsterdam. And finally, we have this third area that's up for grabs, which is the shipping track, and it has 4 different tracks corresponding with each of the 4 different commodities that you find in this game. And basically players are trying to advance in these tracks as far as possible in order to gain more points. So basically players are trying to have the majority. There's a little bit of an area majority game taking place in each of these 3 different categories. And basically not all places are created equal. Some of these places have more intrinsic value than one another. Therefore, it's a highly more contested and more coveted location, and players are really trying to get the majority in those locations. But having secondary or tertiary, depending on the player counts, can come in handy in certain locations and still score you lots of points. Now, what's really interesting about this game is that it innovated the mechanism that was later borrowed by Herbaceous, where players are drawing cards one at a time, and as they draw, they have to make the decision as to whether or not they want to keep that card for themselves or they want to discard it. Now, there's a third option in this game, which is they want to put it up for auction so that all players can compete for that particular card, including the player who drew it. It's really interesting because once you make the decision, you got to live with it. And as you continue to draw cards, quite often you'll regret it. Lots of really cool, neat things taking place in this game between the area majority in the 3 different categories in this game, and the fact that you have this really cool draw and decide mechanism. Not to mention that the auction bidding that takes place in this game is through the use of this gimmick here, the auction, the Dutch auction timer here. Really cool, nice game. Again, from a graphic design perspective, ugly looking, not very appealing, no table presence whatsoever, but it's one of those obscure games that I still get excited to play every time I get it to the table. My number 90 board game of all time, Merchants of Amsterdam. And now we move on to my number 89 board game of all time, another game that was on the list last year, and that is Star Trek Expeditions. And this game also designed by Reiner Knizia, so back-to-back Knizia games here. This game here is published by WizKids, and here we have a thematic Reiner Knizia game. Basically, this game takes place within the cinematic universe of the Star Trek movies that came out not too long ago, reinventing the original series with Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Spock and all these other popular characters. And this game is really cool. It's a cooperative game. Players are basically moving through the board, which represents the planet of Nibia, and each of the sections or the spaces in Nibia have these different mission cards that are face down that players will not know that what is underneath that card until they actually beam down there from the Starship Enterprise or actually move there through the planet of Nibia. Now, while players are doing this, the Starship Enterprise is orbiting the planet of Nibia, and so is the Klingon battlecruiser. And as the Klingon battlecruiser moves towards the Starship Enterprise, the Starship Enterprise begins to sustain damage and it's losing health. So there's a little bit of a race feel there because you want to accomplish all the 3 different missions that you're trying to accomplish as your objective before the Starship Enterprise is destroyed. Also, there's a time track. As you trigger different event cards throughout the game, this time track will progress, and that also serves as a ticking time bomb to rush and pressure the players into being as efficient as possible in accomplishing these missions. Now, the game has has 3 levels of difficulty. I do not even bother playing at the hardest difficulty because even the easiest difficulty is pretty challenging for me, and the middle difficulty, the intermediate level, is more than enough. Really cool cooperative game with some nice hero clicks, miniatures that you're using as your characters sustain damage. Their stats are affected and lowered, therefore it decreases their chances of succeeding in skill checks. Yes, a Reiner Knizia game with skill checks, go figure. Really cool. I like the Star Trek theme, I like the gameplay, I like the cooperative nature of it all. My number 89 board game of all time, Star Trek Expedition. My number 88 board game of all time is another Star Trek game, and that is Star Trek Fleet Captains. And Star Trek Expeditions was on my list last year as high as number 52, while Fleet Captains was number 63 last year. That means they inverted spots. Last year I preferred Expeditions, this year I prefer Fleet Captains. And one of the reasons why is because I enjoy playing this game solo, and I play this game solo through the use of some rules that I found on BGG, along with some homebrewed house rules that I've incorporated myself. And I just play this game to immerse myself in the experience between the different encounter cards that refer back to different events or different episodes that took place in the original series or in Next Generation, and the different cards that you find in your command deck that correspond to different characters, different popular personalities from these 2 original series. I find that to be such a fun and immersive experience. This game is very Ameritrash to its core. You're moving along the board and you're engaging in lots of combat quite often. A lot of it is exploration though, just flipping these face down tiles and seeing what's on the other side. Did you discover a nebula? Did you discover an empty space that's kind of boring? Or did you discover a planet? Is it a habitable planet or an uninhabitable planet? Because if it's a habitable planet, that's very useful to you because you can build an installation there, perhaps a colony, perhaps a star base that's going to grant you lots of points and a particular reference point or key location that you can go back to every time your ship sustains damage and you want to heal it. Really cool, just fun game playing. It's fun to play against another person, but it's also fun with these house rules and variants to play solo as well. My number 88 board game of all time, Star Trek Fleet Captains. Now we move on to my number 87, and my number 87 is new to the list this year, and that's Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. This is designed by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Mablanc. Not too long ago, there was a Kickstarter for a prettied up edition of this game. I was able to get this for a really good price. This is the original edition from Days of Wonder, and for its time, it's absolutely gorgeous. This game has lots of 3-dimensional pieces, from the obelisk to the pyramids to the different sphinxes to the throne of Cleopatra herself, and basically the box serves as a base for the palace of Cleopatra. You place the garden on top of the box, and you place all the different pieces, and you place all the different components that you're trying to build along the way, because basically what the game consists of is each player represents an architect within the guild of Cleopatra's architects, and they're trying to be the person who contributes the most to the building of her palace and her garden. And you're participating in lots of actions. There's a little bit of card drafting taking place, and the card draft is really neat because you have this situation where you shuffle the deck half face up and half face down, and you shuffle that and you deal them into different market rows as they come out, which means some of the cards are going to be face down, hidden information, and some of the cards are going to be face up. And when players are drafting cards, they have to draft all the cards in a particular market, which means some of those cards in some cases might be face down. So do you want to go for the really okay cards that are face up and you know what you're dealing with, or do you want to take the chance and perhaps get some of those face down cards and hope that they're really valuable? Really cool, really neat. All the while players are playing certain actions and doing certain things that are going to accrue corruption for them, and you do not want to be corrupt, because the most corrupt architect at the end of the game is going to be fed to Cleopatra's crocodile and will not factor into the winning endgame scenario, even if they do have the most money and contributed the most to Cleopatra's building. So you got to consider that, and you got to find ways to mitigate the accruing of corruption. You got to find ways to heal the corruption. That way you will find yourself in the mix and in the hunt for the victory at the end of the game. Really cool, really neat, great looking game, really amazing table presence, but also mechanically speaking, really sound and fun to play. My number 87 board game of all time, Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. And now we move on to my number 86 board game of all time, and that is a new game to me again, just like Cleopatra, and that is Pathfinder, the adventure card game. And this game basically is a card or board game version of the very popular RPG, tabletop role-playing game, Pathfinder. And this game is so cool, so neat. I only played it a few times, and I already have it ranked number 86, which tells me that it can go in either way, right? It's possible that this game, upon further play, can be lowered on my list, or it's possible that it could bump up depending on how the game lives up to future plays. Mostly, I've been playing the introductory scenarios, and that has been a fun and enjoyable experience. Players take on a character, and based on their character, they're going to have a particular deck of cards. And their deck of cards consists of different items, different weapons, different spells, perhaps even different characters. And you're always going to be drawing from that deck of cards to have a hand. And as you play your hand, you're going through different locations that are represented by cards along the board. And in each of those locations, you're trying to go through each of those decks as quickly as possible, because inside those decks, you will find whatever objective your scenario has in mind. So it might be a particular enemy you're looking. There might be particular objects and items you're trying to acquire by searching through these decks. And as you play your cards, you're running out of your deck, and you do not want to run out of your deck. If you run out of your deck, you lose. So you have to find ways to keep your deck filled. You have to find ways to refill your deck. You have to find ways to acquire new cards in order to put them in your deck or into your hand, and that way you won't need to draw more cards from your deck. Really cool, really neat. I still don't understand all of the intricacies of this game because, again, I've only played it a handful of times and only have played the basic scenario. But so far, the thematic integration and the fact that each character has a very particular deck to them is really, really exciting. And I like the aspect of going to each of these different locations, knowing the configuration of each of these face-down decks that represent these locations, but not knowing exactly what you're going to get when you flip over the card because you shuffle these cards. It's all a matter of probability. And if you search through that deck and when you find what you were looking for, it's such a satisfying experience. My number 86 board game of all time, Pathfinder, the adventure card game. And now we move on to my number 85 board game of all time. And this game is not new to the list this year, and that is Xenoshyft. Onslaught. And this game was ranked number 53 on my list last year, so it's dropped down a bit. This is a deck building game with a science fiction, science horror theme. Players are basically taking on the role of different Marines who are trying to defend their headquarters. They're trying to defend their base from the onslaught, as the word indicates, of these aliens that come in the form of different insect-like creatures. And these are giant, dangerous aliens that you have to watch out for. Now, throughout the game, players are trying to acquire all the different troops, the different types of troops that they're going to need, paramedics, stormtroopers. They're going to need all these different troops, and as the levels progress, the troops that are available to you are more and more powerful. And they're also trying to have a right balance of equipment. You need armor and you need particular weapons in order to equip these troops so that they can fight and engage in battle with these aliens. Now, the game is divided into 9 rounds, and each of those rounds are divided into 3 different waves, 3 different waves of 3 rounds apiece. And as you progress, the aliens get more powerful wave by wave. So wave 2 is much more powerful than wave 1, and wave 3 than wave 2. But also the troops, the units that are made available to the players to draft or to purchase also become more powerful. So it kind of goes toe-to-toe as far as that's concerned. Now, you're using this currency called Xenoshyft to purchase these cards. And what's really cool is that when you acquire a card, it does not go into your discard pile to be shuffled into your deck on a future turn and then drawn in a hand. Instead, it goes into your hand immediately. So it's a very tactical game as far as deck building concerned. It's not long-term strategy. You're thinking about what units, what troops, and what weapons, what armor you need right then and right there in order to survive the onslaught or the wave of those different enemies. And it's such a tough game. Till this day, I've never won this game. I've only made it to the 9th round one time. And quite often I lose before I even make it to the third wave. That's how bad I am at this game. Even so, I must be masochistic because I really am enjoying this game every single time I play. Now, I am starting to incorporate a new little modification to the rule where instead of playing with one division of the military, which grants you a special bonus power throughout the game, I'm playing with 2 different military divisions because I am that bad. I need as many variable player powers and bonuses as possible in order to be competent in this game. Really cool, really exciting game. Good solo, good cooperative. My number 85 board game of all time, Xenoshyft Onslaught. And from this point forward, the rest of the games for this list are all new games to me this year. So there's been already a couple of new games earlier on, and now the remainder are new games. My number 84 board game of all time, new to me last year, and that is Carson City. Now, I had already played Carson City, the card game, which was a smaller version of this game, and I really enjoyed it. But Carson City, the board game, is so grandiose. Now, this is a Wild West themed worker placement game. I alluded to this game earlier on in the list, I think in the 110s, when I talked about Deadwood, another Wild West themed worker placement city building game that I really enjoyed, but was knocked down on the list because of my introduction to Carson City. This game is such a neat game. First of all, players are partaking in worker placement, but what's interesting is that you have this pool of workers, your cowboys, that you are given at the beginning of each round. And those workers kind of, they become exhausted. If you use them, that's it, they're gone. They don't go back into your supply as typical in worker placement games. But any unused workers, any workers you decide to not use for whatever reason, you can carry them over and save them for the next round. And then at the beginning of each round, you get a new pool of workers, a particular amount depending on the round. This game plays in 4 rounds. So if you want to, you can take very few actions early on, build up those workers, and maybe save them for a future round. I think that's really cool, really neat. Also, this game innovated the idea of dueling for worker placement spots. So whenever you place a worker in a particular spot, it's not secure as in most worker placement games. No, your opponents can go to that place and they can trigger a duel where you would compare each other's strengths, roll dice accordingly, and see who is the victor. Now, your strengths are all dependent on how many pistols you have in your personal supply, but also each of those unused cowboys in your ranch, cowboys that you have not placed down so far in this round, they're going to also contribute to your strength. So there's a further incentive for you to save those workers for future rounds because you can build up your strength and make players think twice before messing with you in a duel. Really cool, really neat. You're trying to buy buildings, locate them and situate them in the parts of Carson City that are most beneficial to you in places that you in particular happen to control, and therefore you will be gaining money throughout the game because of controlling those locations and because of surrounding them with particular terrain features like houses or hotels, or surrounding them with mountains even. These things will all contribute to your scoring and to your income. And at the end of the game, the player with the most money is the winner. Really cool, nice, neat Wild West theme to it. The mechanics are sound. My number 84 board game of all time, Carson City. And now we move on to my number 83. And again, all these games are new to my list this year. And that is Blue Moon City, designed by Reiner Knizia. We started the list with a Reiner Knizia game. And here towards the end of the list, we have another one. And Blue Moon City basically takes place in the Blue Moon world or universe that was invented first by another Reiner Knizia game, Blue Moon. And this here is a second edition by Command Games. It was originally published by Fantasy Flight, but I guess they gave up the license for that game. And basically, this is a little bit of a city building game. Players are trying to rebuild the city of Blue Moon. And they are doing so by discarding particular cards of particular colors that match the color of the particular tile or section of the board they're trying to rebuild. And there are a bunch of different spots, different opportunities for players to contribute in each of these buildings. So for example, here you've got these 3 circles. That means 3 contributions can be made. One contribution of 2 cards, another one of 2 cards, and another one of 4. And after the 3 contributions are made, players will flip over the tile, indicating that that part of Carson City has been rebuilt. And the player who contributed the most, let's say a person contributed twice, that player is going to get a particular bonus. But all the players who contributed at all are going to also get bonuses, additional bonuses. So you're going to have some reward and some incentive for trying to rebuild or contribute to the rebuilding of these different locations. Ultimately, you're trying to get crystals, which you will use in order to rebuild the obelisk, and the player who contributed the most to the rebuilding of the obelisk is going to be the winner of the game. Really cool, really neat, fun game, streamlined mechanisms, but at the same time, very strategic. My number 83 board game of all time, Blue Moon City. My number 82 board game of all time is Legends of Andor, and this here is designed by renowned board game artist Michael Menzel. And Michael Menzel has made another game recently called Adventures of Robin Hood, and that game is making a little bit of noise as well. And I'm very curious about that game, but I have not played it yet. Now, Andor here is a fantasy-themed adventure game where players cooperatively are taking on the role of a band of heroes trying to solve all the different quests that's found in this game. There's tons of expansions that add characters and other adventures, other bad guys and monsters for players to deal with, more narrative, more story, more event decks. But here in this game, players are controlling a band of heroes which consists of a warrior, an archer, a dwarf, and a wizard. And what's cool here is how asymmetric all of these characters are and their special benefits and bonuses. And players are trying to obviously strategically play and cater to the strength of their characters. And it's so neat because each character rolls a different amount of dice when resolving conflict. For example, the wizard only rolls 1 die. However, the wizard has the power to flip that die over to the opposite side. So there is a strong advantage as far as that, because if they ever roll low numbers, at least it won't be too low because they could flip it over to the opposite side. Now, the archer, for example, has the power of hitting people that are a space away. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the same space as the persons or the enemies they're trying to attack. But they get to roll 4 dice, unlike the wizard, but they roll 1 at a time. And after each roll, they have to decide if they want to keep the die they just finished rolling or they want to roll again. And because that's the thing, no matter how many dice you roll, the warrior rolls 3 dice, they only get to pick 1, the highest one. Then that 1 die that they pick, that highest die, they're going to add their strength modifier to that. And then they're going to roll for the enemy and add their strength modifier, compare the 2 numbers, and see who wins in combat and how much damage is dealt. And it's really cool because you have their damage, and as their damage lowers, not only are they closer to being eliminated from the game, but they also roll fewer dice. So as they get weaker, it makes sense. They have less dice that they are rolling. Really cool. I like the narrative that's found here in the event decks, in the narrative deck, in the storylines for each of the particular scenarios. The artwork, of course, as you could imagine, by designer or board game artist Michael Menzel, is absolutely gorgeous. My number 82 board game of all time, Legends of Andor. And now we move on to the last game for today's list, my number 81 board game of all time, and that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shadows of the Past. And when I was a kid, I was a huge TMNT fan. I love the comics, I love the movies, I love the action figures, I love the cartoons, the animated series. So obviously a board game with this intellectual property is going to appeal to me. And this is designed by Kevin Wilson, who is a master at Ameritrash design. He basically really knows how to make a dungeon crawl. He made the original Descent first edition. And this here is a dungeon crawl style game. There is no campaign play in this game. I believe future standalone expansions like City Fall and Change is Constant might have introduced a campaign feature to the game. However, here that's not the case. This is a cooperative 1 versus all game where 4 players, or whether or not you're playing 4 players, there's going to be 4 heroes, the 4 Ninja Turtles, no matter what. 4 Ninja Turtles are going to take on the Overlord, the game master, if you will, who takes on the role of Shredder, his minions, and all the different forces of evil. And it's really cool because it's so asymmetric. Not only do each of the turtles differ from one another as to what they can do and how they can contribute, but the way actions are carried out are totally different versus good versus evil. Because the turtles are resolving their actions mostly through the rolling of dice. Each turtle has a particular configuration of dice, because the turtles are mostly resolving their actions through the rolling of dice. Each turtle around the table has their own unique set of dice. As a matter of fact, Raphael has more dice than all other players. However, because of his egotistical tendencies, he cannot share dice with the players who are adjacent to him. And that's one of the really cool features of this game, where players not only roll their dice, but once they roll them, they place them in front of them. And the way they place them in front of them is very particular, because the leftmost die will be able to be shared with the player to their left, and the rightmost die will be able to be shared with the player to their right. Now, the evil mastermind, the Overlord player, this guy is mostly resolving the actions through the playing of cards. You have all these different cards depending on the minions and the bosses and the bad guys that you have in your control for the particular scenarios. You have a deck of cards that you're going to be playing, and those deck of cards are going to trigger the particular actions for the Overlord player. I think it's really neat. I just love getting myself into the world. I love the fact that the rule book and the scenario books are presented in the form of a comic book with a little bit of comic strips for people to read as they learn the rules and as they see the different scenarios that they're going through. Really cool, really neat. If you're a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan, this is a game I absolutely recommend. My number 81 board game of all time, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shadows of the Past. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this particular group of 10 games. And don't miss us next time, because in a few days, we're going to be sharing my numbers 80 through 71 board games of all time. You don't want to miss it. Well, take care, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.